name's Daniel Pryor, and I'm the head of programs at the Adam Smith Institute. For those of you who are unaware of who we are, we're a free market think tank based in Westminster in London, and we try to change public policy as well as public opinion through media, events, educational outreach, and as well as political events such as this. We're very pleased to be hosting this event in partnership with Japan Tobacco International as well on tobacco harm reduction and the potential of reduced risk products to help smokers make the switch and improve their health. So to kick things off, I'll just introduce our panel of speakers that we've got, a fantastic panel, which I'm very happy we've managed to assemble. We have on our right, our far right, certainly not in politics terms, but in positional terms, Mark Oates, who is the director of We Vape, which is a consumer group that aims to magnify the voice of vapers in the UK public policy debate. He's also the founder of the UK Snus and Nicotine Pouch Users Association and a fellow at the Adam Smith Institute. On our centre right, again in positional, not political terms, I'm sure, we have Louise Ross, who is interim chair of the New Nicotine Alliance, which is a charity in the UK which has the objective of promoting public health by means of tobacco harm reduction. To my centre left, certainly not his political position, I imagine, is Christopher Snowden, who's head of lifestyle economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs and also the author of various excellent books, including The Art of Suppression, The Spirit Level Delusion, and Velvet Glove, Iron Fist. And on our far left, we have Nikki Small, who is the Fiscal and Regulatory Affairs Director at Japan Tobacco International, and she's worked at JTI for nearly 15 years and is a qualified accountant and tax advisor. And for those who are unaware, JTI offer a range of reduced risk products in the UK with their e-cigarette brands as well as their heated tobacco and nicotine pouch brands. So to kick things off and kind of give an idea of what this discussion is really about, I'd start by saying that this year, specifically 2021, really is a pivotal year in terms of the whole vaping tobacco harm reduction debate. The UK is no longer part of the EU, and we've got the opportunity to really become and embrace our position already, to be honest, as world leader in this approach to smoking harm reduction. The Adam Smith Institute has recently published research on this issue, looking at how vaping, snus, heated tobacco, nicotine pouches, and various other smoking alternatives can play a really important role in tobacco harm reduction, whilst at the same time, and I think this is important to note, retaining the sort of freedom of choice that we try to defend in this area as free marketeers and liberals. Now, having left the EU, politicians and lawmakers are arguably better placed than ever before to pass the sort of regulatory reforms that can provide smokers with access to a range of these sort of products. And on the international stage, if we move away from the UK for a moment, we also have the other COP, COP9, which many of you in this room may have heard of, some may have not. Basically the annual meeting of the WHO's Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, which looks at trying to set the sort of international policy standards around tobacco as well as reduced risk products. And the UK really has the opportunity to play an outsized influential role in influencing that debate towards being more pro-tobacco harm reduction, more liberal, and more effective, in my opinion. So this panel aims to explore these sort of issues and more, and I'll start with a brief introductory statement from each of our four panelists, looking at the question of how the UK can help to really switch more smokers to these sort of safer products, both at the domestic level and the international level. And Mark, I'll go to you first.
Thanks very much, Daniel. First and foremost, I'd say in order to help people switch from smoking, the government shouldn't do it by bullying and coercion. Smokers are fully aware that smoking is dangerous, but what they're not aware of is that reduced risk products such as snus and vaping and nicotine pouches are vastly safer. In fact, Action on Smoking and Health did a survey, and it found that 60% of smokers currently either don't know that vaping is safer or think that vaping is actually more dangerous or as dangerous as smoking. And that's a massive issue. A further study was done and worked out that that corresponds to 1.8 million smokers not switching to vaping if they knew that vaping was safer. To give you a parallel, imagine if 60% of the public thought that the COVID vaccine was not going to help them get COVID. The other thing that's really important is free choice and choice for the consumer. So I think what we need is a smorgasbord of options for smokers. Vaping's fantastic. We've got 3.5 million people vaping in the UK, but there are other alternatives. One of those is snus. In Sweden, they nearly achieved smoke-free 2030, 5% of the population smoking, and that's because of Swedish snus. They've got, with men, they have the lowest smoking-related illnesses, and so it's time that the Conservative government legalise Swedish snus. We've also got nicotine pouches, which offer another alternative to smokers. The government must regulate them correctly. They shouldn't do what they did with snus and ban snus. They should also make sure that the regulation prevents bad news stories occurring. We need a level of regulation that makes the product safe for users. Another area that's important is heat not burn. Not many smokers are even aware that heat not burn exists. And this is really down to the regulation, which bans tobacco products from being advertised. And I'd say rather than ban tobacco products from being advertised, the government should ban products based on their risk. So smoking products you shouldn't be able to advertise, but products such as Swedish snus, which does contain tobacco, and also heat not burn, there should be a form of advertising that can inform the consumer, because if they're not aware that these products exist, how are they ever going to switch? Turning to the international subject, obviously in November we've got COP9, and that poses both a risk and an opportunity for the UK. If Britain lets the rest of the world control and change the rules on an international level around reduced-risk products, that will mean that the National Health Service here can't set its own agenda in terms of encouraging people to switch to safer products. It could lead to the government being encouraged to ban flavours or even tax vape. So Britain needs to go on the front foot and take it seriously and make sure that rather than being forced to follow what other international countries want to do, they look at us and take our lead. And this leads me on to something that I think is very important. The area of harm reduction in tobacco, for me, is an international development issue. The British government currently spend a huge amount of money trying to prevent deaths from malaria, HIV/AIDS, and malnourishment. But they don't have any attempts to encourage other countries to follow our lead and follow a harm reduction model. And just finally, why is this important for the Conservative Party? I think it's important because it fits with the Global Britain agenda, but also in terms of levelling up. We know that some of the poorest people in Britain smoke the most, and we know that if we can help them move to a reduced-risk product, we can put more money in their back pocket, and we can also help improve health outcomes. And if you look at the data around elections, I did some polling and found that 35% of vapers in the UK said that during the referendum, they were influenced by the EU's regulation, the TPD. In America, we've seen neither Trump nor Biden really stood up for reduced-risk products. Neither of them stood up for vaping. And there are millions of vapers in America, and had one of them stood up and say they were going to defend vapers, then perhaps Trump would have won the election if he'd taken that course.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. We'll now move on to you, Louise, if you'd like to make your opening remarks.
Follow that. Well done, Mark. That was very, very comprehensive. I wear a number of stop smoking hats. I've been in smoking cessation since 2004, and I launched the first vape-friendly stop smoking service in 2014 because I was absolutely convinced of the power of alternative products to help people switch away from smoking. But sadly, however many years on that is, we're many years further forward, and still the majority of smokers are afraid of trying alternative products because they fear that they're just as bad as cigarettes or possibly even worse. And I think that, there's a number of factors there. There's the influence from America, where people talk so much about EVALI, what is supposed to be lung conditions caused by vaping, and in fact it's not. Fears about flavours, the WHO spreading misinformation about tobacco harm reduction. On the WHO website, they say very clearly that e-cigarettes are undoubtedly dangerous to public health. And that really doesn't help, especially when you have what seems like the majority of healthcare workers undermining patients who want to switch away from smoked products. So I feel that this is an opportunity to really get to grips with the fact that the UK is a world leader, as Mark said, in tobacco harm reduction, and using COP9 or whatever comes after to change our position and not be bullied by European rules and legislation that restrict people's choices. Because if you stop people using tobacco harm reduction products, what are they going to do? They're not going to say, well, I'm not going to use anything. They are going to go back to smoking. And it's very clear that in California, where a flavor ban was introduced, young people didn't just stop using nicotine, they went back to smoking. So smoking rates rise as tobacco harm reduction products fall on the market. We don't want that to happen in the UK.
Thanks very much, Louise. Moving on to my left, Chris, if you want to. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Dan. I can't believe it's been 2 years since I was at the Tory Party conference talking about vaping with the Adam Smith Institute. I think the first one was probably 10 years ago now. And at the time, I could never have imagined that things would have got worse. But they have, for a range of reasons. I think I'll focus on two, because they're responsible for things getting worse globally. Things haven't really got worse in Britain, they just stopped getting better. I mean, rates of vaping are pretty much flatlined. Since around about 2017, an incredible number of smokers still haven't even tried vaping. I've just been having a drink one actually before I came to this event, and I said I've got to go because I'm going to go to the ASI and do my annual vaping panel. And this guy said, I didn't know you were a vapor. I've been smoking since I was 15. It's impossible to stop. I said, well, did vaping not work for you? Because I never tried it. This is an intelligent guy, works for a think tank, a left-wing think tank, admittedly, but he never tried it. Now he was asking me, does it get that throat kick? I said, well, I don't know, find out. There's vape shops everywhere. Around about a third of smokers never tried vaping. It's extraordinary. And of course, a very large number of smokers have tried it but not gone on with it for one reason or another. Now, I'm not here, like Mark, I'm not saying the government should be bullying people out of smoking. If they want to smoke, that's obviously their decision. But the health benefits are obviously so enormous, and also the financial benefits in terms of the gap between vaping. I spend £1 a week or something on vaping, that it doesn't make sense to me that more people aren't switching over, if not to vaping, then to heat not burn, to nicotine pouches. There's plenty of options out there. Why is it not happening? Well, I say the two big issues at the moment, World Health Organization and Mike Bloomberg. They're the big threats to vaping, and both of them in the past couple of years alone have become much more malevolent in the public debate. The amount of money that Mike Bloomberg is spending attacking vaping worldwide is absolutely staggering. He's spending $160 million just to try and get e-cigarette flavors banned, just on that one policy objective. Now, in the world of advocacy, that is an absolute fortune. And he's spending much more in various different respects all over the world, with various front groups, vital strategies, and all sorts, including in the UK. Millions of pounds are going into this. The anti-vaping movement is absolutely awash with Bloomberg money, and it makes a difference. And a lot of the scare stories that you hear about vaping can be directly traced back to Bloomberg and his various organizations. Then you have the WHO, which in turn is funded by Bloomberg, and Bloomberg is a WHO ambassador for his contributions. The WHO, I can't understand why the WHO is so anti-vaping. People have different theories. I guess a lot of it is just a kind of instinctive puritanism. Part of it is just this idea that they've got their plan of how the world is going to go tobacco-free and now nicotine-free, and they've had this worked out for years and they're not going to be taken off that road. I don't know what the reason is, but again, it's got worse in the last couple of years. And WHO Europe, for example, says that their express aim is a nicotine-free world. Now, a tobacco-free world is pretty unrealistic, in the same way that the war on drugs is unrealistic, and this is kind of extreme zero-tolerance approach can only lead to disaster. But the idea of a nicotine-free world doesn't even make sense in theory. There's no ethical or economic or, above all, health justification for a nicotine-free world. And yet the WHO is leading as many member states as it can in that direction, banning e-cigarettes, not banning cigarettes, but banning e-cigarettes and similar products. So it's a real problem, and it's compounded by the endless scare stories. And I think that insofar as the solution to this, in terms of the UK, Public Health England's been scrapped. It's got its replacement now, the Office for Health Promotion and Disparities. Hopefully that organisation will carry on Public Health England's good work in this direction. I think we need more funding for good research. At this point, it's just sheer weight of numbers in terms of public perception, and public perception is going backwards in relation to the relative risks. There are now huge numbers of people who think that e-cigarettes in particular are as dangerous or more dangerous than smoking. And that's true in the UK, it's true in Europe, and it's certainly true in America. So we need more studies, more evidence showing there isn't a gateway effect. These products are not even 95% less hazardous, 99+% less hazardous. There are opportunities, as Mark has already said, with Brexit to legalise a few things. And when it comes to the WHO, it's already been mentioned that they've got their big conference of the parties going on very shortly. That's COP9. Nobody knows what COP9 is. Everyone knows what COP26 is. And that's going to be across the news every day, probably. Politicians will be pouring in there, trying to take the credit for whatever goes on. It's going to be a big story. It'll be full of the media. There'll be none of that with COP9, and not just because it's only a webinar this year. There wouldn't be any of that even if they were holding it in The Hague as planned, because it's deliberately very, very low profile. They don't want people knowing what's going on. Politicians hardly ever attend. God knows who attends. It's difficult to even find out who's attending, let alone how you volunteer to become a delegate. The whole thing is top secret. They keep the media out on the first day within hours. They keep the public out. It's not acceptable, in my opinion, for a taxpayer-funded organisation to do that. It's not like any other UN conferences. I think the UK, considering it is by far the biggest funder of this conference, should withdraw its money. It should defund it. If it's going to carry on this prohibitionist anti-health direction, I think we should absolutely pull the money out and spend it on something more useful.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. And just thinking about the prospect of a nicotine-free world is bad enough, kind of similar to a caffeine-free world, as I'm sure people in here can appreciate. So, Nikki, moving on to you for your opening remarks.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So the question you might be asking is, why is a tobacco company here on a tobacco harm reduction panel? So at JTI, we believe in freedom of choice. It's not our role to dictate to adult smokers and force them to change their habits, but we know adult smokers do vary in their needs and desires. Some enjoy smoking and don't want to quit, but many are now making the choice to switch to those products with the potential to reduce harm. Our goal as a company is to continue to provide consumers with a wide range of quality products across the spectrum of combustible tobacco and those alternatives with the potential to reduce risk. As Dan mentioned earlier, we have smoking alternatives in 3 categories, and we're the only manufacturer in the UK to offer those: nicotine pouches, heated tobacco and vaping products. What's crucial is, though, to provide adult smokers with the information they need to make an informed choice about the products they choose to consume. So, as has already been said, the UK has taken a leading role in embracing the reduced risk potential of e-cigarettes, and PHE's statement that vaping is 95% less harmful is known worldwide. But vaping products are not the only products with the potential to reduce risk. But what evidence is there to support that? At present, it only exists within the industry. To strengthen the UK's standing on tobacco harm reduction, it's time for the UK government to focus its efforts on similarly supporting all potential less harmful alternatives and champion their potential harm reduction benefits. But there seems some reticence. Earlier this year, speaking in a Westminster Hall debate, the then Minister for Health stated that there is no such thing as a safe tobacco product and all tobacco is harmful, including smokeless tobacco. It's true, there is no such thing as a safe tobacco product, but there can be safer products. Just like vaping is 95% less harmful, the element of harm is not eliminated, but it is reduced. How can a statement be made like this without evidence? Treating all tobacco products the same would be detrimental and prevent existing adult smokers from making an informed choice about considering switching to alternatives, including heated tobacco and nicotine pouches. We'd call on the government to take action to acknowledge the potential and efficacy of less harmful alternatives, for example, by extending the full review on the evidence of safety for vaping products, which is due to be published next year, to other smoking alternatives, such as heated tobacco and nicotine pouches. and actively promote their benefits to existing adult smokers in the same way that they do for vaping. Secondly, they should make clear to existing adult smokers looking for a potentially less harmful alternative, through public information campaigns and education initiatives, that all of these products are not the same as combustible tobacco products and do not carry the same level of risk. Thirdly, this must be underpinned by thoughtful regulation that instills consumer confidence in these products and does not conflate them with combustible tobacco. Population harm reduction can only be achieved by offering adult smokers a choice of potentially less harmful alternatives to move away from combustible tobacco. We believe the UK can truly become an advocate and world leader in tobacco harm reduction by furthering an evidence-based and fair regulatory system that embraces the opportunity for all these products. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Nikki, and we'll open up to more general discussion with the panel now. And I guess to kind of kick things off, if we think when Public Health England looked at some of the other alternative products, so fairly on board when it comes to vaping, when they looked at, say, heated tobacco or nicotine pouches and the like, I think there's a broad recognition amongst the public health community that these are also safer, reduced risk products and they can help with switching. But there is also this kind of reaction of, well, you know, we've already got a mature vaping market, why do we need to kind of introduce these other alternatives as well? And I was wondering if I could maybe get someone's thoughts on that. What's the kind of need for other alternatives when vaping is already well established as one? Don't know what to say. Yep.
Yeah, sure. I speak to snus users and nicotine pouch users day in, day out, and for them, some don't even like nicotine pouches, but they prefer snus. Others like nicotine pouches, but they don't like snus. So the consumer wants choice, and I don't see why we shouldn't give it to them. And the end result of not giving them that choice is that people won't make the switch from smoking. Just as people like different flavors with vaping, then we need that choice and opportunity. Same for heat not burn. The way that the nicotine actually goes into the body is different for each product, and some people prefer others. So the government needs to give us that choice.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously right. I mean, vaping is clearly not for everybody. I don't remember seeing Mark vape. I don't know if you vape or not, but you love your snus, right?
I use all nicotine products. I vape.
At the same time,
I associate you more with the snus, which is a product that I've been encouraging smokers to try for the last 10 years and very rarely succeed. I personally really like snus. You like your nicotine pouches, don't you? Martin Littlewood at the IEA doesn't get on with vaping whatsoever, but he really likes his heat not burn. People are different. That's why you've got to let 1,000 flowers bloom.
There's also a convenience factor as well. So for something like nicotine pouches, you could use it in situations where you can't vape, for example, if you're on an aeroplane or something like that. So we need those variety of choice.
Yeah, that's exactly what got me to go from vaping to nicotine pouches. Moving on to the kind of the COP9 and the WHO topic more specifically. When it comes to, let's say we're sitting here and we're having a conversation with the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, what would we say in terms of, okay, what do we actually need to do in detail to make sure that the UK can really shape the international debate in a positive way, other than just kind of generally adopting a pro-tobacco harm reduction stance? What sort of things can we do to actually influence that? Yep.
Sorry. I think a key one is evidence. I think we've all touched on it, that the UK needs more evidence. I think if we're looking at COP9 particularly, we have a concern that with COP9 it's in a virtual format and it doesn't lend itself to proper discussion on the topics that are at stake with, you know, novel and emerging products. So we would say that really at COP9 the UK needs to push to note products and not note reports, and not adopt them, and defer proper conversations to COP10 when these could be had properly.
Anything to add? I guess another question from me on the WHO again. Chris, you mentioned this in your remarks, that there's kind of this view that I think is held by a lot of people in this sort of space that, well, you know, if the WHO isn't going to change their approach and we are at one of, if not their biggest funders, why shouldn't we simply pull out? Does everyone on the panel share that opinion that, you know, if they don't change their approach, we should just leave, or are there any?
To be clear, I wasn't suggesting we defunded WHO altogether, although that may well be my private view. But I was talking specifically about the FCTC. We fund, I don't know, some ridiculous percentage, like 80% of the funding from the FCTC comes from the UK. And the WHO does the exact opposite of what the UK is doing. Now, I'm not suggesting that just because we fund the WHO, it should do whatever the UK wants, but I am suggesting that if it's going to go in a completely unscientific, anti-health direction, maybe somebody else should fund it. You know, let some of the prohibitionist countries fund it, let Australia fund it. But I don't see why we should be wasting this money on an organisation that is going directly contrary to health and is directly contrary to the policies of the British government.
And Louise, a question for you on kind of the NNA's specific priorities when it comes to changing regulation, the sort of things that at least sometimes have been enabled by our exit from the European Union. What sort of things specifically can we do now already that haven't been done yet, simply for either politicians not focusing on this area as much as they should, or just general inertia?
I think we have to be very opportunistic and make sure that that the UK is looking at making it easier for people to switch rather than harder. So watching out for any signs that there is going to be legislation or regulations that make it harder for people to get the flavours they want. This is an opportunity to remove the limit on the size of bottles, the size of tanks. To make sure that the sort of like mission creep from Europe doesn't affect the UK. We need to watch that very, very carefully. And I agree with you, Chris, that we should be robustly challenging the nonsense that is coming out of WHO about tobacco harm reduction. That WHO has got a role in protecting people in low and middle income countries, but this eliminating nicotine from the world is absolutely unhelpful.
Yeah, as you say about caffeine, but I don't know what world we're going to live in. We're going to have plain packaging for alcoholic drinks. We're going to ban.
Don't give them ideas.
They're going to ban, caffeine and nicotine. I don't really know what the point of living will be, but when it comes to FCTC and defunding it, it's not really realistic. For some reason, supranational organisations hold a kind of godlike aura over national politicians. They're always dishing out awards, and maybe they're looking for future job opportunities. But really, I think we need to be using the fact we pay so much towards the FCTC and see it as an opportunity for Britain. We want to be a global leader. No one wants this. And it's not a very popular subject. We're obviously trying to do it with COP26, but why not also recognise that 8 million people a year die from smoking?
A lot of kind of talk about the UK being a world leader in this area. When it comes to kind of building coalitions with other like-minded nations, are there any that we can look to as kind of other examples of governments that might be pro-tobacco harm reduction or share this approach? Are there any other than the UK, or are we standing alone here?
Well, Canada and New Zealand have kind of gone in the right direction. I mean, New Zealand did the same as Australia. They had a de facto ban. I mean, they already had a ban, I think. I mean, in the Australian situation, nicotine was classified as a poison unless it was in cigarettes, weirdly enough. And so it was already banned. New Zealand went through a process of legalisation, which basically embraced tobacco harm reduction and has been very successful over there. Canada has kind of done the same thing. I mean, there's not many countries, unfortunately, that have really gone out and pushed tobacco harm reduction in the way that Public Health England has. You've got countries that have left it alone for one reason or another, sometimes just simple lethargy, really. But then, the number is getting smaller. The best a lot of places can hope for is that their governments kind of ignore the issue. But in terms of actually embracing it, there are really very few. But at the WHO level, that doesn't matter, because you've got to have total consensus. One country can veto everything. That's all we need to do. And we're not going along there now as part of the EU delegation. We're going on our own terms. So if there's a will, there is very much a way on this.
Louise, did you want to just add something on Canada?
My understanding is that Iceland is actually very relaxed about tobacco harm reduction and doesn't make a big fuss about anything in their country. Canada are currently looking at a flavour ban, and there are factions there that are pushing the whole debate very much the wrong way, in my opinion. If you look at a comparison between the UK and Ireland, for instance. Ireland very anti-tobacco harm reduction, UK very pro. Smoking rates in Ireland have stagnated. In the UK, rates are falling fast. So, the evidence is there. We need to make much more noise about that.
On one of the kind of common objections, and it's been referenced a few times to the idea of tobacco harm reduction, is the worry about youth access. And we see this with vaping and some people suggesting, in my opinion, I'm sure the rest of the panelists' opinion incorrectly, that it has some sort of gateway effect towards cigarettes. But what sort of things can regulators and also the industry, in your perspective, Nikki, do to actually prevent this sort of youth access more effectively?
Yeah, so if we take sort of the two products we're looking at, so we have vaping products and nicotine pouches, they're the two key areas for youth access prevention. With vaping products, nicotine-containing vaping products are well regulated in the UK. They're subject to notification requirements, submission of toxicological data. The area we see the issue is on zero nicotine-containing liquids. They don't have any regulation. They are very often appealing to minors. We've seen in mystery shopping that well-known brands are imitated to specifically appeal to youth. So we believe the UK needs to regulate all vaping products in the same way to ensure that consistency and clamp down on youth access prevention. I have some examples of those sorts of products if anyone is interested afterwards. On nicotine pouches, Mark touched on it earlier, we need more regulation, which is a bizarre concept.
Certainly on an Adam Smith Institute panel.
Yeah, exactly. But at the moment, they're only regulated under general safety product regulations, and that means they can be sold to minors. There is no 18-plus requirement on them. So we've actually just agreed an industry voluntary framework on the regulation of nicotine pouches, which is kind of similar to the vaping regulations that exist. But ensures that they are not appealing to youth, so don't appeal to youth culture on the packaging, for example, and don't use flavour names that appeal to youth, like bubblegum and things like that.
It's great to hear a rapturous round of applause for your remarks on youth access there, Nikki. Chris, if you could quickly give some comments on this kind of gateway theory when it comes to vaping, because it does seem to be something that a lot of people who maybe aren't as familiar with the topic think is realistic or a prospect.
Well, yeah, the proposition is that people start off vaping and then, for some weird reason, decide to switch to a product that is 100 times more harmful and about 10 times more expensive. And it will always be possible to find somebody who has had a drag of a vape and went on to be a smoker. There's a lot of people in the world, and people do lots of different things. And so you have this kind of mountain of studies showing essentially the same thing, that if you look at the data in a certain way, you can find the kind of people who start vaping are also the kind of people who in much smaller numbers start smoking, as opposed to somebody who's never vaped at all. And anyone who's kind of looked at this literature with a bit of common sense understands why that is. It's that people have certain you get risk-taking people. You also have people who have just an inherent desire for nicotine, right? So in the 1940s, when smoking was its apex, you had around about 50% of the population smoked. The other 50% basically didn't like nicotine and didn't use it. So we kind of know that around about half of the population at any given time quite enjoys using nicotine. The reason it's much less than 50% now is obviously because smoking is really dangerous, so lots of people kind of gave up or never took it up. But people who like nicotine. And if you're the kind of person who's going to give vaping a go, you're the kind of person who's going to give smoking a go. And so you can carry on producing these studies till the cows come home, but you'll never get over this basic flaw in the methodology. But it's exploited by anti-vaping people who will continue to say that people who vape are like 3 times more likely to smoke. If there was a genuine gateway effect, then given that vapes have been around for over a decade now, you would expect to see the places where most people vape also have the highest smoking rates. Of course, you don't see that. You see the absolute opposite, including in the USA, where there's the most hysteria about this. You've got relatively high vaping rates amongst high school students, although dropped a lot in the last couple of years, and record lows, not just record lows, but very clearly a kind of plummet going on at exactly the same time as vaping went up. So, although you can always find a kind of correlation between the two, if you look at the aggregate data, which is obviously what matters the most, like, is this actually going to lead to more people smoking? Clearly not. Clearly the opposite. Clearly it is many times more a gateway away from smoking than it is a gateway to smoking. But as I say, you can carry on doing these studies and you'll always find the same thing, and it will always be flawed in the same direction. And that's why I said before that the people who are sensible in this debate and the relative handful of good academics need to be given more money to do more research, because at this point it is just a matter of quantity of studies. And the anti-vaping people just go like, yeah, okay, you got these studies and these studies showing that vaping works, it gets people off smoking. You got a few randomized control trials showing that vaping is the most successful method for getting people off smoking, bar none. But we've got 100 studies from the University of San Francisco saying that it's toxic and it causes cancer in piranha fish, and and there's this gateway effect. And politicians who are generally not that scientifically literate just kind of weigh them up. They weigh up the studies. They go, well, there's more of these studies than there are those, so I think we should clamp down on vaping.
Yep.
The other thing to note about US data is that they conflate ever use with regular use. So, they'll ask young people, have you vaped in the last 30 days? And if people say that they vape once, they're counted as users, exactly the same as if somebody is vaping every day. So clearly, the American public are panic-stricken, as are the politicians, and thinking that this huge epidemic of vaping sweeping the country. If you actually look at the number of regular vapers, amongst under 21s, the number's actually very small. And, thank goodness we're a lot more rational with surveillance in this country. But, it's a very emotive subject, as you say, because, people don't like the idea of a lot of young people, starting to use nicotine.
Well, just one more quick question from me, and then we'll open things up to the audience. I guess the obviously big news recently is Public Health England being replaced. Do any of the panelists have a view or an expectation as to whether that's likely to affect this whole debate in a positive or negative way, with Public Health England being consistently fairly pro-vaping in their attitude? Do we think that's likely to change in any sort of way, or are we pretty safe?
Well, firstly, I think it is a matter of, generally speaking, of celebration that Public Health England has been closed down. And it was only their vaping stance that made them anything other than totally useless. So yeah, in very narrow sense, it's a shame that Public Health England has been closed down. However, it is being replaced by an identikit body, as far as I can tell. It's Public Health England 2.0, same organisation, different stationery. And I know for a fact that Martin Dockrell is going to carry on doing his work on tobacco and vaping, which is what counts from our perspective on this. I suspect you'll see the same personnel across the board, but importantly, he is there, and he is good on harm reduction. And you have to remember that the people who've been producing the annual studies and who came up with this 95% safer number that's been cited around the world, they weren't people who actually worked in Public Health England. They were independent academics who were just commissioned by Public Health England. I don't expect to see any change. I think we'll be fine on that front.
Okay, well, we'd love to open things up to your questions now, and I think we have a roving mic somewhere. I'm just looking out for it. We do indeed have a roving mic at the back, so please feel free to ask any questions, criticisms, comments within reason. Yep, at the front. We can wait for the microphone.
Where does the process go in the UK? There is Brexit has happened. What is going to be the next stages in this process going forward?
Anyone have particular thoughts on that?
Particularly referencing anything particularly referencing? Okay, well, I think start off at 10, a review into the toxicology of Swedish snus would be a great thing to do. The same studies should take place for nicotine pouches. Because the power that vaping had once we had that 95% safer figure really helped convince people. So I think that's a great level. The government has obviously got smoke-free 2030 target, and we're not going to get there on the current laws. So the status quo just won't work. The government actually has to make a positive step change towards achieving it. And my big fear is we get closer to 2030, rather than utilise harm reduction, which takes time to do, they'll just try and beat smokers with a stick.
Yeah, I feel like the 2030 target might well go the same way as the 2050 target without any sort of changes there. In terms of the kind of the hope, at least, is as well as a review into Swedish snus, we're going to start seeing some changes about what we've done on the EU's Tobacco Products Directive, and specifically looking at things. For my money, the most important thing is advertising, and specifically marketing, so that you can now, let's say you're a vaping manufacturer or something. Right now, you can't really put on Public Health England thinks this is 95% safer on your packaging. That to me is an absolute disaster in public health communication, right? It's something that we're failing to address, a very real and well-evidenced issue that a lot of vapers still don't know the facts about the relative risks of vaping compared to traditional tobacco cigarettes. So that would be kind of the number one priority, and what I think and what I hope the politicians that are interested in this space, and there are politicians very interested in this space. The APPG for vaping is kind of the first place to look, and they've got plenty of sound Conservative members who are looking at this particular issue and trying to push the government more broadly to really change their approach. And it's not even about change, though. It's not as though there's like a widespread opposition to some of these reforms. It's just that it's not high enough up on the government's priority list, and we need to make sure, and organisations like Mark's and Louise's, and of course the ASI and the IEA need to kind of bang the drum and say this is why this is really important. This isn't just a kind of a fringe issue that doesn't really affect people's lives. At the end of the day, there are millions of smokers in the UK, many of whom would benefit significantly in terms of their health if they switch to a reduced risk product. So, kind of hammering home that point, this does matter, this is really important, and the government should pay more attention to it. Hopefully will result in some of those specific changes on marketing or reviewing Swedish snus, for example.
The other great thing on the marketing policy, which Daniel suggests, is it doesn't actually cost any public money, which I know the Adam Smith Institute and Rishi Sunak would quite like. You can literally have profiting companies just display public health messages on their products.
Yeah.
This is also an opportunity to change the labelling on packaging, so to remove the highly addictive labels and have something that is much more engaging for the public. Making them realise that actually switching is good for their health, not something to be scared of, and that affects pregnant women as well. I'm particularly interested in the fact that too many pregnant women continue to smoke, and they will often say to my team on the Smoke Free app, that they're scared to vape because it says on the packet there, this contains nicotine, which is highly addictive. But actually, what we need to convey is that it is so much better for them and their baby to not smoke and to use something safer.
There's almost this kind of internalized puritanism as well that's preventing people from making the switch. Or if you survey vapers who have, or if you survey smokers who have tried vaping but then gone back to smoking, top two reasons why they went back to smoking. One is it didn't feel enough like smoking, hence the importance of some of these other reduced risk products like heated tobacco, especially being useful for that kind of objection. The second reason is they didn't want to replace one addiction with another. And the sort of language on packaging that Louise has referenced kind of reinforces this idea that the problem here is nicotine addiction. Whereas, of course, certainly from a public health perspective, and I think from just a common sense perspective, it should be about actual health harms that we're looking at here. It shouldn't be about nicotine use for its own sake or anything along those lines. So it's important to kind of reassess those messages for that reason as well. I think it would help a lot of smokers to kind of reevaluate why it is that they didn't decide to stick with vaping. Any other? Sorry, yeah, go on, Chris.
Just on the warning thing, it's a relatively trivial matter, really. But I mean, given that we have left the European Union, those of you who are not familiar with this particular topic, and God bless you for sticking out this long if you're not, won't know. But it's not just the nicotine fluids that are labelled with an EU mandated health warning saying this contains nicotine. If you buy an atomizer, which is a piece of metal, it says this product contains nicotine. Right? That's how bad the legislation was in the European directive. Now, I hope that the UK goes a lot further in repealing EU regulation, but that seems to me absolutely cut and dried example of something that should be got rid of after Brexit.
Any more questions from the audience? Gentleman on just over there. If you could. Thanks. Yeah.
It's very difficult to make a vaping product that will go through the standard medical licensing process and be approved that retains any appeal to consumers. Do you think that the lack of a medically approved device has any effect on vaping rates, and would it be a good thing to have a medicinally licensed vape?
If they had mandated that vaping devices had to go through medical regulation, then we wouldn't have the same number of vapers we have today. The stringency of regulation means that when you put an application in, by the time it actually gets through 5-6 years, if it ever does, the actual products have just moved on so far. What people were vaping on in 2009 is very different from what they're vaping on today. So, as the Adam Smith Institute knows, too much regulation can inhibit that entrepreneurial attitude to very effectively improve your product. And that's the story of vaping entirely. It's not the story of government diktat. It's not the story even of big business. It was small businesses that set up. And in the UK, we had people, what I call garagistas, making products in their garages. So too much regulation, which exists within pharma, I think is going to stymie the growth of the product. I don't really see it being worthwhile doing so. I know a lot of pharmaceutical companies would love to be able to do that. But no, we've got to keep it as what it is, a consumer product that people enjoy using.
I used to think that it was completely nonsensical to medicalise the product. But I do think, having spoken to many healthcare professionals about this, that rather than relying on just education and reform of their thinking, providing a licensed product that they could write a prescription for would change their minds in an instant. They would say, all those other products, you shouldn't use those, but I'll write you a prescription for this one because this one's okay.
Do you not worry if we were in that situation, though, that it would feed through towards a broader skepticism towards the consumer market? Because I sympathise with that argument myself, but I worry that the ideal would be it wouldn't be an either or. It would be both a medical and consumer market existing parallel. But do you worry about kind of substitution there at all? Or?
I think the market is established enough to withstand that. But the beneficiaries would be people under 18 who currently can't buy and can't have the products bought for them. And so, they're still able to smoke because they can get hold of cigarettes, but, their parents can't buy a vape for them. So a doctor could prescribe that sort of thing. It could also make vaping more accessible to people in mental health institutions as well, but I think the market could withstand that.
Nikki, from kind of the industry side of things, do you see much of a role for the medicalised market in the UK and beyond, or do you think that this should primarily be a kind of consumer-led as it has been?
Yeah, I think for me it's about instilling consumer confidence, like I said earlier. It needs to be about the government having the right evidence to back up their statements, and education campaigns, public information initiatives, the mainstay of what they do now, but really reinforcing that through the right routes.
Any other questions from the audience? We had a few. On the left just there. We'll get to you at the back.
Hi, I'm Brian Connell. I'm a delegate here at the conference, but I've also spent some time working for the tobacco sector in track and trace and that kind of area. My question is, does the panel think that the changes COP and the changes you were describing that you wanted to achieve in regulation would be more likely if it wasn't the case that many of the big four tobacco businesses had such a high profile as suppliers in this area?
Well, I guess, Nikki, probably best to go to you on that one first.
As Mark mentioned earlier, there's many small businesses also involved in this, but there are the four big tobacco companies. I think there is a scepticism when evidence comes from the industry, and that's why I said earlier, I think the government needs to do their own research in this area and support the alternatives that are available. So look at all of them, so not just vaping, heated tobacco products, nicotine pouches as well, and do their own research and come up with their own results to support that.
Anyone want to add to that at all?
I mean, from a kind of a basic public relations lobbying type point of view, it's unhelpful that tobacco companies are involved because of the stigma around tobacco companies, big tobacco and all this kind of stuff. It would be an easier sell, I guess, it was just hundreds of independent companies. On the other hand, you're not giving the tobacco industry anywhere to go. You're not giving them any road to run if you're just going to say you have to sell cigarettes and that's all you're allowed to do until we finally extinguish you. You know, I'll bring the parallel with COP26 again, right? Not only will be lots of journalists and politicians at COP26, there will also be a lot of energy companies, a lot of businesses in general. There'll be fossil fuel companies there. There'll be BP and Shell, I dare say, there, talking about how they're going to make the transition to go 100% renewable. And there'll be a few Greta Thunberg type fanatics saying that they shouldn't be there, or maybe no capitalist businesses should be there at all. But the mainstream would rightly see that as being an extreme position, and that if we're going to get through this and achieve our goals in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, we need to have the major companies, major energy companies involved with that. And I think the same is true with this, and reasonable people can probably see that. Unfortunately, the likes of the WHO and a lot of the anti-smoking groups around the world are not reasonable people.
I think just to kind of add to what Chris has said there, you have to, the kind of negative PR aspect of it, you do have a trade-off there with the kind of unique capabilities of some of these established tobacco companies in the reduced risk products sector, right? I can't imagine too many of the kind of garagistas that Mark was talking about developing a viable heated tobacco product that, you know, would, and then mass market that using complex supply chains around the world and actually give people access to some reduced risk alternatives. So I think that there's a role for kind of both sides in the industry, and certainly accept the kind of the PR aspect of it is not ideal, but you have to trade that off against the actual offering to consumers at the end of the day as well. And as Chris said, you know, if you want to exclude them from this debate, where are they supposed to go, right? There's no realistic alternative for them.
I just say that consumers, that your normal average consumer of a vaping product doesn't care whether their product's made by a tobacco company or not. There's a small minority that are very hardcore about not using a tobacco company's product, but it's very small. Obviously, when it comes to legislation, that's different, with government not speaking to tobacco companies. But there's parallels with the environment. There's also parallels with the car industry. You know, car crashes kill huge numbers of people, but the government regularly talks about how they can improve safety with car companies. And so, you know, they should be listening about how they should achieve that best.
We had a few more questions and hands up earlier. I don't know. We'll go to the back, I think. Simon, you've been waiting a while.
Thanks. Simon Clark from the Smokers Group, Forest. As Mark said, the government has set itself the target of making England smoke-free by 2030. Now, given that many adults still enjoy smoking and don't want to quit, is a smoke-free England actually desirable, let alone achievable? And if you believe that a smoke-free England is desirable, how far would you go to achieve it?
Does anyone take that one first? I'll happily take it first. I think that the fact is that they have set this goal. I don't think that that's necessarily the goal we want. We want to maximize kind of consumer preferences, and I think that may be likely to result in a smoke-free England. It seems like, you know, especially with a mature reduced-risk products market that we have now, I can see a realistic scenario where just purely through express market preferences, we do end up, if we make the right regulatory changes and the government gets serious about some of those, 5% or less prevalence rate. Now, I am at the end of the day a liberal, a classical liberal, a free marketeer, so I don't think that if people, as they are now, are fully aware of the risks of smoking and they're fully aware of the existence and the relative risks of reduced risk products, that, you know, they should be stopped from smoking, or there should be more kind of paternalism in order to achieve that target. That said, you have to work with the kind of government's priorities, and I think that to a large extent, the kind of way that the tobacco and vaping debate more broadly has been going is that you're not going to get any sort of realistic wiggle room in policy formation if you stick to that sort of thing as your primary argument, as opposed to, well, you set this target, here's the best way to achieve it in a liberal free market way that uses consumer freedom and the power of innovation. I think that's a compelling story, and one that's likely to actually result in better outcomes for those who wish to continue using cigarettes, but also those who do not and wish to switch.
Well, the smoke-free target, just to be clear, is not actually 0%, it's 5%. So in that respect, Britain is already a heroin-free country and all sorts of other things. 5%, is it realistic? I think that's probably the question. I mean, the government has been making a lot of unrealistic pledges, usually 10 or 15 years out in the distance. Boris Johnson made one today. We're going to have renewables fully renewable by 2035. I don't think that's even possible. We're going to halve child obesity by 2030. This target for smoking came about out of nowhere, really. Theresa May, in the fag end of her premiership, just decided that was going to be the target. There's no reason to think that many people want to give up smoking, apart from anything else. Every year, the Office of National Statistics does their smoking prevalence survey, but within that, they include the question of, do you want to give up smoking? Which straight away economists don't really like, because these are stated preferences rather than revealed preferences, and if they were true preferences, they would have either given up or at least made a few attempts to give up, and most smokers don't. But nevertheless, we have 14% smoking prevalence at the moment. Every year the ONS does this survey, it finds fewer and fewer smokers say they want to quit. It's down now to nearly 50% from about 70% a few years ago, which suggests that a lot of people who did want to give up smoking actually have done, and a lot of them would have used vapes and so on to do that, and that's great. But you've got about half of the smokers now are so hardened that they don't even say to someone on the phone that they'd like to give up smoking. So you're not getting to 5% like that. You're getting at best to 7%. You need to have some buy-in, obviously, from smokers before you just decide, as the Prime Minister, that you're going to get below 5% smoking prevalence. So I don't think it can happen unless we give smokers a lot of very tempting alternatives. And that is realistic. You know, it's only 9 years away, but I believe that you can not only give them the alternatives, but hopefully persuade them to try them at least. I mentioned in my opening remarks, a third of smokers have never even tried a vape. They've been on the market, they're everywhere. There's vape shops on every street. And yet so many people have not even tried it. And a lot of those who've tried it didn't like it for one reason or another. Well, let's find out why they didn't like it. Maybe they genuinely do like smoking. I'm with you, Simon. If people want to smoke, they should absolutely be allowed to smoke. And if that figure is 5, 10, 15%, it's none of the government's business. But I do think, given that people smoke for the nicotine, that we can probably persuade a few more than we're currently doing to switch away from the combustible cigarette.
We had another question, yes, in the middle. Thanks.
Hi. Psilocybin has been declared a breakthrough therapy by the FDA in the US. It has, in the clinical trials, some 80% success rates for tobacco cessation at 6 months from 1 to 2 treatments. This is a complete big game changer in smoking cessation. Psilocybin, for anyone that doesn't know, is the psychoactive compound in magic mushrooms. It is a psychedelic medicine, and yet no one at conference is talking about it. Why is that? And in this room in particular, would the panel join me in requesting that the Home Office reschedule psilocybin so that we can see us hitting those kind of reduction rates that we need?
Well, what a great question for the Adam Smith Institute, who's recently co-published a paper with the Conservative Drug Policy Reform Group on
I may work with the Conservative Drug Policy Reform Group, and that is an amazing paper.
I thought that might be the case, yes. I think that there is good early-stage clinical evidence around psilocybin and its potential for smoking cessation, as well as more general kind of addiction treatments. Whether it can compete in the long run with some of the more established consumer things that we've been talking about today, I'm not so sure. I'm trying to imagine a kind of Tesco shelf with vapes and then kind of psilocybin capsules on the other hand with, no, that's not quite the model we're looking for. But maybe in a clinical kind of level, yeah, certainly I can see them playing a role if we get some more of those larger clinical trials going. But yeah, nice plug for our shared psilocybin paper. Thanks very much.
Can I ask, what is the mechanism by which it helps people give up smoking?
So psychedelic therapy is a sort of 4 to 6 hour treatment. You're not going to be finding it on the shelves in Tesco's, in which the real mechanism, the underlying mechanism, which the guys at Imperial are investigating the Center for Psychedelic Research is that it knocks out the default mode network in the mind, which is why it's an effective treatment for everything from addiction to depression to even they're looking at anorexia now, because if your default mode of thinking is maladaptive and stuck playing the same tape, whether that's I want to drink, I want to drink, I want to smoke, I'm no good, nobody loves me, I shouldn't live, whatever it is, that underlying mechanism, psychedelic therapy can knock it out, reset the brain in some way. And what we see is that people coming out of the other side of a 6-hour journey say really lovely, very banal things like, I realized smoking's really not very good for me. And instead of knowing it, they feel it at the end of that session, and there's complete cessation. I've seen it with my own eyes, and many, many people, and the clinical trials are showing this. My experience of big tobacco is that they're not even perceiving that this is a threat. It's so far out. It's almost like, you know, with these people saying there's this thing called the internet, and it's going to change everything. Psychedelic medicines are going to change absolutely everything, and psilocybin, this is just one area in which psilocybin shows great promise, but it's fascinating to me that there is hardly anywhere at conference that is referencing this great innovation, a scientific leap forward for our country and the world, and we're letting the Americans steal the march, effectively.
Well, thank you for your
Sorry.
no, it's
very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting, I'm sure, for the audience here. Are there any more audience questions? We've got few more minutes for hands raised. If not, I realise we had an hour and a half for this slot, but I don't want to have a panel that goes on for an hour and a half because that's too much for most people. So, yeah, we had one last question. Oh, okay, no worries. Yeah.
If my second question's different to my first.
Excellent.
I wanted to ask a question more focused on tax, and in particular, with heat not burn, we've got tobacco sticks, and I just wanted to ask a question about, as smoking cessation rates for sticks decline, is there the risk that government tax sticks for heat not burn in the same way? I think there's an issue in Germany at the moment, and I just wondered, you know, with your political heads on, how does someone like Rishi try and work his way through that?
Well, it's a similar issue that they've got with electric cars, isn't it? But I'd say that I don't see the mood music at the moment with electric cars moving towards let's tax electric cars in the same way we tax petrol cars straight away. It's something they're going to have to think of later. But they have a catch-22 there, don't they? Because you do it too soon and you inhibit or prevent the move to electric cars, but then you do it too late, and then that's going to be a big political issue to turn around and ask people to suddenly be paying, you know, £1 a mile or whatever the tax will need to be. And it's exactly the same when it comes to vaping and snus, although I don't think we should ever be taxing vaping, snus, and nicotine pouches. I don't see why you would. We don't tax your coffee that you get, so why should you be taxing vaping products? You know, very, very low risk products. If people want to use them, they should be able to use them. The reason why people think about taxing them is because of the stigma that's brought over from cigarettes. And I don't want to get into a discussion about cigarette taxes, but you know, arguably they've done a lot of trouble when it comes to some of our poorest in the country, and big black market already being created. I think the data suggests that every time they increase taxes, the revenue doesn't go up because people are moving to the black market.
I guess just to add to that, we have to be quite thankful for the current taxation situation we have for reduced risk products in the UK compared to basically everywhere else in the world. We're one of a few countries that has actually implemented a form of risk-based taxation. So, you know, e-cigs on VAT, a lower effective rate when it comes to heated tobacco products, for example, and that's something the Treasury were very supportive of, and there seems like there's no sign of changing that. The mood music, and I think the best kind of way of judging it is, I think it was maybe a couple of years ago, there was some rumour that got out in one of the papers that there was going to be a vape tax. And front page of a few different papers just saying this is ridiculous, everyone opposes this, and of course it was forgotten about and nothing really happened there. And I don't see that changing unless there is a kind of sea change in the sort of public health consensus around these products, which I don't think there will be.
Yeah, just to add on that, so with heated tobacco versus traditional cigarettes, there is a big difference in the tax rate. So it's about 50% on heated tobacco and it's about 90% on cigarettes. So there is a difference, but it's the competing objectives when you come to tobacco tax policy. It's health and revenue. So the last predictions we saw the forecast of revenue dipping off So there is obviously that understanding in the government that the more people move to reduced risk products, they will. As Mark said, with nicotine products, we agree they shouldn't be taxed. They should be left alone. But tobacco products, tobacco does need to be taxed. It's a right and proportionate for it to be taxed. But yeah, there will be that compete, and the government have to accept it at some point. I mean, overall, in the grand scheme of things, tobacco taxation generates a lot of money every year. So it's 12 billion a year in excise and VAT, but it still only represents less than 2% of total tax receipts.
All right, well, I'll ask each panelist for maybe a short 30-second, 1-minute closing statement on what they see as the kind of prospects for change, whether they're optimistic or not about Britain really becoming a world leader in this area, and then we will finish, starting with you, Mark.
Sure, I feel like Simon's been shortchanged by me not answering his question.
Go for
I think smoke-free 2030 is desirable in the same way that it'd be desirable if you all spent an hour a day at the gym. But the only way of achieving that, the only country I know that could achieve that would be probably North Korea, and they'd be blaring into your living room with the TV telling you to go out and do your physical training. And also doing that harsh method in the UK is not going to work. It's only going to work by helping people, by informing them of safer products. One warning to vapers I always give is that once the tobacco controllers have finished off the smokers, they'll come straight for us, because their whole philosophy is that they want to tell people how to live their lives. And so I think it's important that vapers try and prevent this incursion on all people's lives. People should be free, really, to do as they please, as long as they don't harm us.
Good ASI roundup there, Louise.
For me, it's about the next generation of children. A child that grows up in a home where both parents smoke is much more likely to become a smoker themselves, because it's just a normal part of life. I would like that child to grow up in a household where people use nicotine in a cleaner form, and so you don't have another generation being harmed by the damage that smoke causes, because cigarettes are a dirty delivery system, and there are better ways of doing it. Plenty of choice.
Chris?
Karl Marx said,
oh, no.
Last words of fools who haven't said enough. I have said enough.
Thanks, Chris. So I would reiterate some of Chris's comments earlier around the freedom of choice. If smokers want to smoke, they smoke, but we should also have those opportunities for smokers who do want to switch away and move to alternative products. I think the UK is in a really strong position to do that. The UK is known as a world leader on tobacco control, and it should be on tobacco harm reduction as well.
Well, thank you very much to all of our panelists, Nikki, Chris, Louise, and Mark, for what's been a really interesting discussion. If you're interested in these sort of issues and want to delve in more, the Adam Smith Institute's Golden Opportunity paper, published by myself, sorry for the self-promo, is available on our website. But thank you very much for the fantastic audience questions. Thank you to our panelists, and we hope to see you tomorrow for our other Fringe events. Thanks very much.